Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kara, and I'm with the LTAP Center here at ODOT, and I will be your host for this webinar today. Today's webinar is State Fiscal Year 2025 Ohio Mobility Management Program, and we're thrilled to have Jesse Schmitzer as the presenter. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items to ensure a smooth webinar experience for everyone. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the questions panel on your screen. You can type your questions there and we'll address them during the Q&A session at the end. If you're experiencing technical difficulties or have any other issues, feel free to use the chat panel to communicate with our team, and we'll do our very best to assist you. A PDF copy of the presentation is available for your reference in the handout section. Please note that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to all registered attendees after the session within about 24 to 48 hours. All right, with that out of the way, let's get started. It's my pleasure to hand it over to Jesse. Jesse, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the State Fiscal Year 2025 Ohio Mobility Management Program orientation. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be talking about the Mobility Management Program as a whole and what to expect for the State Fiscal Year 2025 program year. So I'm going to just jump on in here. So just as a reminder, and I know we've kind of talked about this in the emails that we sent out for this meeting and for registration with this meeting, this is a mandatory meeting for all new and returning Ohio Mobility Management Project recipients. If you're watching the recording of this training, which is after the live fact, please submit the following to us, to either myself or to Crystal Brewer, and I'll give you our contact information here shortly. But you need to submit to us a letter confirming that you watched the recording, including the date that you watched it. It needs to be on agency letterhead, and it needs to be signed by both the mobility manager and the mobility manager's direct supervisor. As we said, the recording will be available within 24 to 48 hours. We'll make sure to get that out to everyone. Everyone must watch this recording if they didn't attend this live meeting here by July 15th, 2025. So just a reminder for that. So today we're going to be doing some welcome and introductions about our office and the Ohio Department of Transportation. We're going to do an overview of the program. We're going to cover some host agency requirements, some Ohio Mobility Management Program requirements. Tim Maseko is going to talk today about some compliance considerations for the program, and then we'll talk about 2025 next steps, what to expect moving into the new program year. So first, we'll do an Office of Transit overview. So this is the table of organization for the Ohio Department of Transportation as a whole. So our mission as an entire agency is to provide a transportation system that is safe, accessible, well-maintained, and positioned for the future. So to give you an idea of where the Office of Transit fits into the Ohio Department of Transportation, you can see we have all of our different divisions here, and we're in the Division of Planning. The Office of Transit is located within the Division of Planning. So just a high-level picture of where we land in the bigger scheme of things. So our Office of Transit, we're small but mighty, I like to say. We have our administrator, Chuck Dyer, and then we're broken up into 3 different program sections. So I oversee our program management section, so you're going to work with me and my colleagues who I oversee when it comes to the application process, to funding awards, to contracts, to invoices and things like that. We have our compliance and planning section, who is overseen by Sarah Walton. You can see that they do a lot of different TAR things. They'll review different programs, provide guidance on different federal and state regulations. And then we have our financial management section, which is overseen by Amy Chang. You'll see a couple of familiar names in there too. A lot of you probably have worked with Debbie Green and Alex Ewers on many other things, but this gives you an idea of our whole office and who you might want to contact depending on what your questions may be. So for the program section, a section that I oversee, like I said, we're responsible for the administration and oversight of multiple different programs, one of them being the Ohio Mobility Management Program. So this just gives you an idea of all the different programs we oversee. There's many more programs than there are people, so we try our best to get back to you as quickly as we can. The compliance section is responsible for ensuring state and federal compliance of all program subrecipients. So they'll conduct what we call technical assistance reviews, or TARs for short, and that's where they come and review your project and make sure that it's following federal and state regulations. They also do drug and alcohol TARs, which is not relevant to this program, but to 5311 program. They'll look at different policies and procedures that may or may not be relevant to the regulations for your specific program. Tim will dive into that a little more specifically for mobility management near the end of this presentation. They look at allowable activities and eligible expenses. They also conduct some risk assessments on certain projects. They work on performance measurements for projects and do some planning assistance. And then they also keep track of all our reporting that we do for all of our different programs. So this is a slide for state fiscal year 2025. This is all the funding that the Office of Transit awarded for this state fiscal year. So as you can see, we had about 39 million in our rural transit program, the 5311 program, 37 million in our OTP2 program, a little over 8 million for specialized seniors and individuals with disabilities, our 5310. A new program that we're overseeing, the Ohio Workforce Mobility Partnership Program, had about 8.6. Bus and bus facilities is our 5339 program. We had about 5 million that we awarded. Your guys' program, the Mobility Management Program, we awarded 4.6 for the state fiscal year. And then the Ohio Intercity Bus Program, we awarded 3.2, and that's for the GO Bus, which I'm sure many of you work with them or have worked with them in the past to meet your project goals and get folks where they need to go. So I want to do a welcome for Crystal Brewer. Crystal Brewer is new to our office. She's going to be your main point of contact for the Ohio Mobility Management Program. She's unable to join us here today, but I know she's very eager to start meeting you all and working with you and learning more about your programs moving forward. So as she gets settled into her new role, I'll also be assisting her with some of your questions and as you reach out for different types of things. So this is the contact information of the two main people in the office that you'll be in contact with regarding your mobility management program. So let's do a program overview of mobility management. So the purpose of the mobility management program, so mobility management projects are considered capital projects that increase access to mobility for Ohioans by increasing understanding and awareness of transportation needs, promoting coordination of transportation options to meet needs, and building sustainable and healthy communities by integrating transportation into planning and programs. So we kind of look at this with three different goals in mind. The first set of goals are our statewide goals, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. We have 5 main pillars of the program that we'd like to see, and that is to increase understanding and awareness of community transportation needs, to increase awareness of current community transportation options and programs, to ensure that transportation considerations are included in local and regional planning activities, to increase local capacity for transportation services, and to assist individuals with accessing all community transportation options. So these statewide goals are met in a variety of different ways, depending on the project and the need of the community. But this just gives you a general idea of how we hold this program up and the main goals that we'd like to see statewide. The second way is to look at it regionally. We have right now 6 regional projects, so 6 regional mobility managers that are working on regional coordinated plans. These are the different regions that we use for this program, the Human Services Transportation Coordination regions. So the main goal, the regional goals, are to work on the Regional Coordinated Transportation Plan, to identify regional collaborative opportunities, to hold regional meetings, and to collaborate across county lines. I know a big need that we see, especially with the mobility management program as you work with folks, is you have a lot of community members that are trying to get to and from different communities, and how we can kind of make that work and get a little creative about crossing those county lines and getting folks where they need to go. And lastly, we have your local goals. So the local goals are going to be what you basically put in your application. So what were the local goals that you wanted to meet with your program and with the mobility manager on your staff? So these are going to differ greatly depending on the needs of the community, but this gives you an idea, breaking it down into those 3 main goals: the statewide goals, the regional goals, and the local goals that we like to see with this program. So these are the maps. So the first one is that Human Services Transportation Coordination region. So we have all the regions here. As you can see, they're numbered and the different colors of the communities that fall within those regions. And then this is the current map of mobility managers in Ohio to give you an idea of the areas that are covered and currently not covered by a mobility manager through the mobility management program. So eligible applicants and locations for the mobility management program are private nonprofit organizations or local government authorities that are approved by the state to coordinate services for older adults and individuals with disabilities, or who have certified that there are no nonprofit organizations readily available in the area to provide that service. The eligible locations vary greatly. If you have any questions on this, basically it's rural communities that can apply, but there are some small urbans that can apply through the Ohio Department of Transportation too. There are some small urbans who would apply directly from the agency in their area that administers the program. It's not always us. So if you have any questions about this, please feel free to reach out to us and we can get you to the correct administering agency for that program. So Ohio Mobility Management Program funding is unique. There's not a dedicated funding source for it like there is for like the 5311 program or the 5310 program. So Ohio Mobility Management Program funding is derived from 3 different of our other programs. So that would be the 5311 program, the 5310 program, and our state GRF program. So it's pulled from different areas so that we can make this program a reality. There are local match requirements. It carries an 80% federal share and a 20% local match share. So local match sources can include, but aren't limited to, direct cash, pre-approved in-kind match sources, and other federal funds that are eligible to be expended for Federal Transit Administration programming, or non-US DOT federal money can sometimes be used as local match. If you have a question about that, you can please reach out to us and we can provide you with some guidance. So we're going to jump straight into host agency requirements. So a host agency is who we have awarded the program funding to. So the Ohio Department of Transportation awards the funding to the host agency, and then the host agency will hire a mobility manager that they will then oversee. So the mobility manager is considered an employee of the host agency, not of the Ohio Department of Transportation. So that mobility manager will follow the host agency's policies and procedures and just local administering policies that they may have in place on top of the federal ones that they'll need to follow from us. So that's the setup of how the mobility management program works. The responsibilities of the host agency through the grant agreement between ODOT and the host agency legally agrees to bear the responsibility of the OMM program grant. They must ensure that all federal, state, and local requirements and regulations are followed and that the project scope is being completed as it was awarded. So some responsibilities may include providing supervision and oversight of the project, determining program planning and providing guidance, ensuring that the agreed upon scope is being completed, complete accurate accounting tasks and procurement, provide human resources needs such as payroll and different benefits, handle employee conflicts and expectations, and create job position descriptions for the mobility management program and to hire and manage that person. So the project job descriptions for mobility management will vary from host agency to host agency, and that's okay. They'll also assist in developing performance measures for the local mobility management program and monitoring associated outcomes. They'll participate in the collaborative, cooperative, and continuous planning process. And they also must notify ODOT immediately and provide regular updates in the event of a vacant mobility manager position. So this includes when a mobility manager is hired or resigns or they switch roles. So just make sure you're letting us know if there's any changes with that within your program. So failure to properly ensure OMM program project requirements and or host agency responsibilities are followed could result in the Ohio Department of Transportation canceling the project contract and reallocating the funding awarded. So if you have any questions about any of this, please reach out to us first. We're happy to help. We definitely don't want it to get to this point. So I just want to take a pause here. If there's any questions about host agency requirements or program overview, feel free to drop them in the chat. We can answer them. I'm not seeing any on my end, Cara. I'm not sure if you are on yours.
Nope, we don't have anything thus far.
Okay, great. So we'll just keep on rolling.
Let's see here. We actually do have a quick question.
Sure.
Let's see here. They said that they think maybe the date should be July 15th, 2024, not 2025.
Yes, that makes a lot more sense. That's correct. Yes, thank you for catching that. So definitely 2024. But if you wouldn't have said anything, I would have let it go to 2025. So I appreciate it. Yes, that's correct. July 15th, 2024. Thank you for catching that. And we'll make sure to let folks know that in a follow-up email.
Okay, that was all we had. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so we will keep moving forward. So Ohio Mobility Management, allowable and unallowable activities. So there are some activities that are allowable that we encourage. There are some activities that are unallowable we want to make sure everyone is aware of before the program year starts. So we're going to start with allowable activities, and these are all activities that are allowable must advance the identified goals of the OMM program in addition to meeting the local program-specific goals submitted through the annual grant application. So some of those allowable activities are going to be establishing and continuing consumer advisory groups, attending community meetings to discuss transportation options, meeting with decision makers to educate and inform about transportation needs and resources, establishing and/or participating in data collection activities to understand transportation needs, current resources, or the impact transportation has on the communities within which you serve. Use technology to create tools where individuals can easily access information about options, such as creating a website or something like that. Producing publications about all the available transportation options in the community. That all is bold because we really want to make sure mobility management programs are representing all of the transportation in the community, not just a single entity, and that includes both private and public transit providers. And then providing direct training to individual consumers on transportation options. Participation in training events or conferences focused on mobility management and/or the program goals. If there's any transit or transit training conferences, they're definitely allowed to attend that. We encourage that. Leading the coordinated transportation planning process, that's a big one we'll talk about a little bit later. Participating in the coordinated transportation planning process, if you're not the lead on it, not all mobility managers are. Participating in other planning efforts, so like workforce studies, health studies, education studies. Short-range planning for transportation services, including gathering stakeholders, finding funding, and developing timelines for implementation. Creating training curriculums for transportation providers. I know many of you did the PAT training, Train the Trainer last year, where you were trained to be a trainer. So you could go to different transit agencies and provide that training to them. Assisting with person-centered transportation planning. Serving as a broker for individual rides, so providing recommendations for people to call if they need those rides. We're specific on this because we'll talk about this a little bit more with unallowable activities about booking rides for folks and how that's unallowable. We really want you to be giving recommendations to people. And then providing direct transit training to individuals and/or groups, which I know many of you do. So host agencies, please note that many of the allowable activities are centered around collaborative efforts outside of the host agency. It's crucial for mobility management projects to be available for other community agencies within the service area. So they're going to be helping with many different organizations in the community. That's what we want to see. We definitely don't want to see a mobility management program just being used for the host agency itself and not being allowed to be out in the community with other agencies. So there's a couple required activities. So the first one is the Transportation Advisory Committee, or the TAC meeting. I know many of you hold these. Mobility management projects gather and lead TAC meetings in the communities they serve. So these TAC meetings must be held or attended quarterly. So if the mobility manager leads these meetings, they must keep record of the following: sign-in sheets, meeting notes, outreach that was conducted for each TAC meeting, and local projects are required to attend the regional mobility management TAC meetings, which they will host too and keep everybody aware of, and vice versa. So the regional mobility managers need to try to attend these local TAC meetings as well. If the mobility manager doesn't lead the TAC meeting, you don't need to submit all of these to ODOT, and we'll request them, and it'll be part of the reporting we'll talk about here later. But just to give you an idea of what we'd like to see when you hold these TAC meetings and things that you need to have in place and keep on file. And the other required activity is the locally developed coordinated public transit human services transportation plans, or the coordinated plans for short. The coordinated plans are a very important piece of the mobility management program. They're meant to identify community resources for transportation and mobility, and to understand the gaps and unmet needs within those resources, and then to determine a collaborative approach to addressing those gaps and unmet needs. So federal law requires these plans to be developed and approved through a process that includes participation by seniors, individuals with disabilities, representatives of public, private, and nonprofit transportation, and human service providers, and other members of the public. So it's a very collaborative plan that requires a lot of outreach, a lot of different meetings, a lot of surveys. The FTA requires that all Section 5310 subrecipients certify that their projects selected for funding are included in the coordinated transportation plan. So the coordinated plans are a really important piece, not just of the mobility management program, but of any 5310 agency in your area. They must be included in the plan in order to be awarded funding. So typically the mobility management program will lead the coordinated transportation planning process every 4 years. And like I said, it includes public meetings, census data and maps getting collected, numerous surveys. They must form and lead a committee that will vote on the coordinated plan, and then they must include the Board of County Commissioners if it's a newly updated plan. So for more information on the coordinated transportation plan, we have a handy dandy website that includes templates, guidance, a review checklist, and a toolbox with everything you need to know about coordinated transportation planning. This is a great place to start if you're a new subrecipient of this funding. So I'd encourage you to visit this site. And it will be it's on the PDF. You can click the link and it'll take you right there. So there's some optional activities for the Ohio Mobility Management Program. So the first one are the monthly phone calls. So the monthly phone calls are phone calls that are typically hosted by ODOT previously, but moving forward, the calls will no longer be hosted by ODOT. However, we will try to remain involved when possible. I know that I think it was the training committee is working on getting those together and hosting those on behalf of the Ohio Department of Transportation. So we'll be involved as we can, but will no longer be hosted by us moving forward. We'll have Ohio Mobility Management Roundtable meetings. These meetings will be held no more than twice a year in person and hosted by ODOT. So that's a change from previous years. They used to be held quarterly. Now they'll be held twice a year. We have one coming up in August on the 27th. It's going to be from 9:30 to 1 at the Ohio Department of Transportation Central Office on Broad Street. If you did not receive that invitation, please shoot me an email and I'll make sure that you get it. But we look forward to having you guys there and spending the day with you, learning more about what your goals are for State Fiscal Year 2025 in any way that we can help you along the way. The Ohio Mobility Management Conference is an optional activity. It's typically in the spring and it's hosted by the Ohio Department of Transportation, and a mobility manager will usually volunteer to set that up in their community. It does a lot of the work for getting that together. So this may be in spring. We're visiting that right now, so we'll keep you all posted as that continues to develop. And then any committee use or involvement is also an optional activity. So ODOT will remain involved in committee activities when possible, but we won't be as involved in the past. So while the committees are definitely a great thing, and to keep moving them forward, I hope to see them keep going forward, and we'll try to be involved as we can, but we won't be able to attend every committee meeting. So we'll talk more about that at the roundtable moving forward. So there are some unallowable activities we want to touch base on before the program year starts. So certain activities are not allowable, even if they advance one of the stated goals of mobility management. So specifically, subrecipients are not allowed to use mobility management project funds to operate transportation services. So subrecipients must also avoid any conflict of interest with transportation providers and not provide preference to any one transportation provider. So we touched on that a little bit, making sure that you're including all of the transportation available in your area when you're doing outreach materials or websites or brochures or things like that. So some allowable activities for the mobility management program include scheduling rides. So mobility managers are not permitted to schedule rides on behalf of community members. You can definitely work with the transportation agency for them to schedule a ride, or you can refer them to different transportation agencies that they can call to book the ride. Mobility managers are not permitted to enter into any contracted service agreements with providers. They're not permitted to oversee any contracted service agreements. I know we have some mobility managers that are placed at a transit agency that has some of these contracted services. So while they can be involved in it, they just can't oversee it completely. And mobility managers are not permitted to lead or oversee transportation procurement. So we'll talk about it later about what that means for procurement for federal funding. While the mobility manager can definitely get the procurement documentation together for whatever they're trying to purchase, they cannot sign it. We'll need some a fiscal person from your host agency to sign it, or your direct supervisor to sign it. And then mobility managers are not permitted to provide direct supervision of mobility specialists or call center staff. Regional mobility managers in that same vein are not permitted to oversee any local mobility management projects, nor have the authority to direct local mobility management project goals or activities. So some other unallowable activities. Mobility managers are not allowed the provision of direct transportation services, which includes providing rides to passengers. They're not permitted to do dispatching services or schedule rides for specific transportation providers. Activities related to maintenance of vehicles, including managing vehicle inventory stock, arranging for vehicles to be repaired, managing recruitment and scheduling of drivers, including volunteer drivers, fundraising and development activities that are specific for the host agency. And again, managing and or leading procurement activities. If you're doing marketing activities for one entity, including purchase of materials and supplies that are general for the agency and not specific for mobility management programs, and any joint marketing activity that doesn't split the cost between the programs. And then lastly, any host agency activity that's not directly related to the OMM program. So for example, Meals on Wheels is not a program that a mobility manager is able to work on and then build a grant for. Submitting another ODOT Office of Transit grant on behalf of the host agency or on behalf of other transportation providers, you can certainly work with them to help them get any data together for their application or help them with the narrative, but they need to submit it. Attending a training or a conference that does not demonstrate a mobility management focus or Ohio mobility management goal focus, and charging fees for trainings that are offered. So with that, are there any Ohio mobility management activities questions?
I am not seeing any just yet. We'll give everybody just a moment to see if they're just typing in. Okay, we do have a question.
Okay.
Someone is asking for a little bit of clarification. A mobility manager cannot supervise a mobility specialist.
Yes, that's correct. So mobility manager cannot directly supervise a mobility specialist. Whoever is supervising the mobility manager would be the supervisor for the mobility specialist as well. So it would be a host agency employee. Whether that be the transit, if your supervisor is a transit director, that transit director would oversee the mobility manager and also oversee mobility specialists.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions.
Okay, so we'll keep on rolling. So next, Ohio Mobility Management Program eligible and ineligible expenses. This is where everybody falls asleep, so please feel free to get some coffee for this one. So Ohio Mobility Management project budgets were approved by ODOT when the state fiscal year 2025 project was awarded. So some of you may have had to resubmit your budget. It's the final budget that was approved by the Ohio Department of Transportation. If you weren't requested to change your budget that you submitted, then the budget that you submitted was approved, and that's the budget that you'll work with for state fiscal year 2025. Changes to the budget must be communicated to ODOT prior to the change taking place, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So all Ohio Mobility Management Program project expenses are broken down into multiple line items dedicated to various expected costs of the program. So this on the right will look familiar to many of you. It's our invoice template, and it's what you submit to us when you're seeking reimbursement for your program. So we're going to break it down for each class. So the first one is the 5310 labor class. So this is going to include other salaries and wages. So salaries and wages for mobility management direct staff, so for mobility managers, for mobility specialists. Salaries and wages for administrative staff that work on the program and also build the program. So adding additional administrative staff hours or increases in wages initially included in the project application must be approved by ODOT prior to reimbursement. So if you identified 2 administrative staff that are going to work on this program in your accepted budget, and you're going to add on a 3rd one, you need to communicate that with ODOT prior to doing that, prior to beginning that. The next one is 5014, other paid absences. This includes vacation leave, sick time, other paid time off that's not contingent on a specific event outside the control of the host agency. 5015 are going to be your fringe benefits. This includes employment taxes, health and welfare expenses, retirement costs or pension plan, and other fringe benefits. And then 5310, in-kind contributions, which will have already been pre-approved during your CFR 200 process. So supporting documentation is what we're going to request when you submit an invoice, and the supporting documentation is there to just back up what you're putting on your invoice. So for 5313, other salaries and wages, we're going to request timesheets for all direct and administrative staff billed to the grant. For 5014, other paid absences, we may request those timesheets again to check that. For fringe benefits, again, timesheets and pay stubs for all direct and administrative staff billed to the grant. And then for any in-kind costs that you're going to claim, and we're going to just check that it matches up with what was accepted during your 2 CFR 200 process. So moving on down the invoice, we're going to go to 5020 for services. The first one is professional and technical services. So these services are the labor and other work provided by outside organizations for fees and related expenses. So this is going to be for things such as advertising firms, professional and or technical experts, consultants, or temporary agents for the program. So if you're going to fund such as like a transportation study and hire a consultant, that's where you would put this as an eligible cost. 50/20 is advertising fees. This is going to be media fees, radio ads, and newspaper advertisements. There's a separate line item for promotional materials, which we'll see down here in the miscellaneous expenses. So just make sure that you're making note of that. The advertising fees and the promotional materials are different line items. 50/20 other services is going to be something like if you have a contract for custodial services or something like that. And then again, if you're claiming any in-kind costs, in this section, we're just going to make sure it matches up with your 2 CFR 200 accepted documentation. So supporting documentation that you may expect us to request for this, if it's for professional technical services, we may request an executed contract, your procurement documentation that followed OFTA requirements, and then invoices from the vendor for the work that they performed. 50/20 for advertising fees, we again may request an executed contract or the FTA procurement documentation to make sure that that was followed, and then invoices for the work performed by the vendor. And the same thing for other services, depending what those may be. And then again, with the in-kind costs, we're going to check your 2 CFR 200 document acceptance. So moving on down, 50/30 materials and supplies. So the materials and supplies are going to include office things such as postage, stationery, office forms, pens and pencils, envelopes, paper, or other general office materials that you need to do your program. And then there's an in-kind cost here as well. So some supporting documentation we may request for this are going to be receipts from the vendor, procurement documentation if needed, an inventory percentage for the Ohio Mobility Management Program used from the host agency if the host agency has multiple different programs that they oversee. And then again, the in-kind cost. We'll just check your 2 CFR 200 acceptance documents. And utilities are pretty straightforward. They cover electricity, gas, water, telephone, internet, and any in-kind costs that you're going to claim on the program. And for this, supporting documentation that we may request include bills from the vendor, making sure that if you're sharing any costs that it matches with your cost allocation plan that was accepted during the 2 CFR 200 documentation. And same with the in-kind costs on 50/40. So 50/90, the miscellaneous expenses. The first one's going to be dues and subscriptions. This is for fees for membership in industry organizations and subscriptions to periodicals. So this is going to be if you're an Opta member and you pay that membership fee every year, you can claim it on this line item. Or if you're an APTA member as well, you can claim that subscription cost here too. 50/90 is for travel and meetings. So this is travel allowances for mobility management projects to participate in industry conferences and other related business meeting expenses. So I know a lot of you travel a lot to go to local meetings. I know I was in my car a lot when I was doing mobility management. So if you do any kind of gas reimbursement to your host agency, this is also where you will claim that as well. In addition to if you travel more to conferences and things like that too. 50/90 is for any bridge, tunnel, or highway tolls that you paid. 50/90 is that promotional materials that we talked about. So if you're purchasing brochures, leaflets, posters, decals, display items, or any outreach materials that you use in your program, this is where you're going to claim that on your invoice. 50/90 other miscellaneous expenses, and 50/91 indirect costs that you may claim if they've been pre-approved. So some supporting documentation that we may request are going to be invoices for dues and subscriptions that were paid, a demonstration of the project need to pay those dues and subscriptions and be part of those organizations. For travel and meetings, we may request approved mileage, meeting and conference approvals, per diem approvals, receipts, the hotel portfolio, and proof of attendance for some conferences. For bridge, tunnel, and highway tolls, again, just receipts and proof of payment. For promotional materials, we may request FTA procurement documentation that you followed the correct federal procurement, invoices from the vendors, and actual materials demonstrating mobility management focus. So we really want to make sure these promotional materials are fair and reasonable in both cost and in quantity, the amount that you're ordering for these promotional materials as well. And then other miscellaneous expenses, it will just depend on what those miscellaneous expenses are. And then again, the indirect cost. So last but not least, we have a few here. So 5220 lease and rent expenses. So that's the payment for the use of capital assets not owned by the host agency. For example, allocated space costs. Maintenance costs, so maintenance of administrative offices, any other admin costs. And then we have a couple non-eligible line items at the bottom, which would include late fees or miscellaneous items that may not be eligible for reimbursement. So some of the supporting documentation that we may request for lease and rent expenses would be lease agreements or space allocation agreements. Again, if it's a cost allocation, we're going to look at your cost allocation plan that was accepted by the Office of External Audits during the 2 CFR 200 process. Same thing with the maintenance costs. Other admin costs, it depends on what those admin costs are for what we may or may not request for supporting documentation. And then again, the 2 ineligible late fees and miscellaneous line items. So some unallowable purchases. The first one is food and or beverages. So these are ineligible expenses for meetings or trainings. You cannot purchase food or beverages. For example, if you have a coordinated planning meeting and you want to buy pizza for everybody, unfortunately, it is an ineligible purchase and it will not be reimbursed by this grant. You can fund that with local funding if you'd like to, but just with the mobility management funding, it is ineligible. And then ineligible expenses as well, food and beverages when purchased during a conference, if the conference offered a meal at the time of purchase. Capital items are unallowable purchases. So this can include things such as computers, laptops, printers, scanners, different technology, scheduling and dispatching software. These cannot be purchased through the mobility management program. However, if you need these items, which most of you need a laptop, that makes sense, you will apply through the 5310 program. So the 5310 program is a separate application that you can apply to for any capital items that you need for your program moving forward. Outreach items that are not reasonable in scope or quantity. So joint outreach materials that don't split the costs are going to be unallowable purchases. Items purchased for agency-wide use, not for mobility management project use, are going to be unallowable. Adding the mobility management project logo does not automatically create eligibility for a lot of these items. I know we've seen that a lot in the past. So if you have any questions before you purchase it, please reach out to us. We're happy to give you a determination prior to that. And then any games or gift cards that you might use for incentive for people to do surveys or things like that. And then vehicles for any purpose are unallowable purchases through the Ohio Mobility Management Program. So are there any expense questions before I move forward?
Okay, hi Jamie. So I have a question from someone who says that when they do one-on-one travel training with a new rider, they take their initial request so they know what information is needed. They want to know if that's allowed.
Yeah, sure. So if you take their information just to kind of know what their needs are or what they're trying to figure out or where they're trying to go, that's absolutely allowable. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right, thank you. And we have one more question. Um, oh, this is, and they're apologizing for backtracking a bit, but they're asking if is a mobility manager not allowed to help design, create advertising ideas for a transportation agency?
Well, that's a really good question. I would say as long as you're offering that same service to all the transportation in your area, then I think that's allowable. But if you're just doing it with one and not offering it to all the other private or public transportation in your area, then it would be unallowable.
Okay. Okay, I think that's the last of our questions for now.
Okay,
Oh,
great.
wait, sorry.
Oh, nope,
We
we're
have one
good.
more question. Conferences and travel is allowed, just not the food, is the question.
You can purchase food at a conference if it's not at the same time the conference gives food. So for example, if we cover your registration fee, which also includes breakfast and lunch at the conference, and then you go purchase lunch when it's offered at the conference, that would be unallowable. However, if the conference doesn't offer dinner, then that's definitely an allowable expense for you to purchase dinner at the conference. And you can include that on the travel and meeting. So hopefully that makes sense.
Wonderful, thank you. Just giving everybody a chance just in case they have another follow-up question.
Sure.
I am not seeing any come through, so I guess we can go ahead and move on.
Okay. So state fiscal year 2025 next steps. So here's what we can expect as we move into the new state fiscal year. So the 2 CFR 200 process, many of you have already gone through this for state fiscal year 2025. Some of you have not. So all awarded agencies received a state fiscal year 2025 award letter. On that award letter, there was a narrative about the 2 CFR 200 process and who to reach out to. So all awarded agencies are required to submit 2 CFR 200 documentation to the ODOT Office of External Audits prior to July 1, 2024. I got the year right on that. So if your agency has not submitted this documentation as of today, it's highly recommended to begin the process as soon as possible to avoid grant delays. So our contact at ODOT Office of External Audits is Larry Henry, who's going to work with you through this process. Some of you will have to submit more documentation than others. It depends on your agency type, and it depends on if you're doing like cost allocation for your program, or if you're claiming in-kind as well. That can add another layer onto what you would need to submit to the Office of External Audits. Once Larry gets his documentation from you, he will review it and he will either accept it or deny it. So there's a link on here that you can follow, which will take you to our transit auditing site, which breaks down everything that you may or may not need to submit here. So these are the five different things for the 2 CFR 200 process. So the first one is cost accounting for federal aid projects. The second one is a cost allocation plan if you're going to be allocating your cost for the program. The third one is if you're a local government, central service cost allocation plans. The other one is for indirect cost rate proposals. And then the last one is in-kind cost used as matching funds, which may be a big one for many of you in this program. So if you haven't started this process yet, I would encourage you to. If you don't know where to start, please reach out to me and I'll get you connected with Larry and then we can begin the process. But these need to be either accepted or under the process of being accepted before the state fiscal year starts for your project to move forward. So you can expect soon for your program contracts to come out. So host agencies are required to sign a state fiscal year 2025 program contract with the Ohio Department of Transportation. ODOT utilizes one span for electronic signature for all parties. So there'll be a signing order that's pre-assigned to the contract. So the first signature is going to be me, the Ohio Department of Transportation Public Transit Manager. The second one is going to be your host agency's authorized official. So whoever was submitted as the authorizing official in your application is who we're going to put on there. So if that's changed, please let us know. And then the last one is going to be the Ohio Department of Transportation Deputy Director. So host agencies will have 30 days to sign their program contracts from the date that the request was initially sent. You can expect to see these come through in late June or early July 2024. So if you're a mobility manager, we'll make sure that you are included on the one-span request. You won't be included as a signer, but you'll be included as a reviewer, which means you'll have access to the contract. And it also means you'll be notified once the contract is complete and signed. So you should see that come through. Both your authorizing official, the mobility manager, and then the ODOT folks will see it come through as well. So that way we're keeping everybody in the loop about where the contracts are. So another piece of this is the certifications and assurances. So host agencies are required to sign and have an attorney sign the Ohio Department of Transportation certifications and assurances. So certs and assurances will not be they don't go through electronic signature. We'll send them out via email to all of the host agencies when we send out the one-span request. It'll just be an email. It will be through a different program. Once complete, host agencies must email it to the OMM program manager, so Crystal Brewer or myself. You'll have 30 days to sign the certifications and have an attorney sign it from the date the request is initially sent. So you'll see those come through when you start seeing the contracts come through as well. If you have any questions on any of these, please reach out to us. So the program invoices. So we will send you invoice templates specific to each program. So based on the budget that was approved or that was submitted through the application, we will fill it out on your behalf and then we'll send it to you and your fiscal person during the first quarter of state fiscal year 2025. So that way you'll have it and it will be good for the entire year. So there'll be different tabs at the bottom. That will be quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. Luckily, we don't have to do quarter 5 and quarter 6 this time. So it's going to be an easy year for all of us. But these are the billing periods and the dates to expect. So for quarter 1, that billing period is July 1 to September 30th, 2024. The invoice due date is always going to be the last day of the following month. So for Q1, the invoice due date is October 31st, 2024. For Q2, it's January 31st, 2025. Q3 is April 30th, 2025, and Q4 is August 31st, 2025. We give you 2 months at the end of the Q4 because we know you're wrapping up kind of the end of the year, the end of the program year, and maybe waiting on some final invoices and billings and things like that. So when you submit your program invoices, you need to submit a few things. So you need to submit a signed PDF version of the invoice template that's filled out. You need to submit an updated Excel version of the invoice template that's filled out. A project cost report, which is going to vary between agencies. It's kind of just like a breakdown of the expenses that you're claiming. So if you have QuickBooks, it's an easy thing to pull. Not everybody uses QuickBooks, so it may look differently. And then we'll request that supporting documentation at that time as we're looking through them, which again can include timesheets, receipts, procurement documentation, or some other supporting documentation as requested by the office. So once you have all these things together, you're going to submit this to a new email that we have, transitnonvehicles@ohio.gov, and then you'll CC the Special Projects Manager, Crystal Brewer, onto that email as well. So then she knows that it went through. And then we can begin our review and reimbursement process. So Ohio Mobility Management Program projects are required to maintain appropriate programmatic and financial records. So the Ohio Department of Transportation will request these via the quarterly report and during technical assistance reviews. Quarterly reports are due on the same day as quarterly invoices. The quarterly report link will be sent to all state fiscal year 2025 host agencies and mobility managers during Q1 of state fiscal year 2025. So you'll have that prior quarter. It'll look very similar to the one that you're currently reporting on. So some of the things to expect with the reporting, and this may change as we develop the program, but for now, the number of people who participated in coordinated meetings, the number of coordination council meetings that were held, the number of meetings that were held with decision makers, data collection activities and participation in activities, the number of publications distributed, the number of hits on a website, an app, or phone calls, the number of meetings attended, and the number of people in an audience at training and presentations, the number of folks that you provided direct transit training to. So we really just want to make sure that you're collecting that data as the program year starts, so then you can report on it and show us the great job that you guys are doing in your communities and with your mobility management project. So are there any questions about what to expect next for state fiscal year 2025?
We do not have any questions as of now. We can go ahead and give everyone just a few moments to send a question over if they have one. I'm not seeing any questions, Jesse.
Okay, onward. Okay, so the last part of this presentation is compliance considerations for the program. So there's some important documents that our compliance team looks at. Some of these are scratched out or crossed out because they're not applicable to the mobility management program. What are the procurement policy, the Title VI plan, ADA policies, and brochures or websites. So the important documents, again, Title VI plan and policy, ADA plan and policy, financial and procurement plan and policies. The Ohio Department of Transportation has templates for all of these available online if you click this link. A note here, if the Ohio Mobility Management Project host agency is a current subrecipient of 5311 or 5310 funding, these important documents should already be in place and will cover your project. So that's one plus of being with a transit agency. If you're not, then we can work with you to get these in place and make sure that you have everything that you need to be compliant federally. So a Title VI plan, which is break it down for you, it's part of the Title VI of the Civil Rights Acts of 1964, broken down into the US DOT 49 CFR Part 21, broken down again into FTA Circular 4702.1B. So this applies to transit agencies, MPOs, state DOTs, and subrecipients. So in compliance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 as amended, ODOT agrees to prohibit and assures that each third-party participant will prohibit discrimination based on race, color, or national origin. So the goals of the FTA Circular 4702.1B are to ensure that the level of quality of public transportation service is provided in a non-discriminatory manner That was not as relevant to the mobility management program as the next two. So the second one, to promote full and fair participation in public transportation decision-making without regard to race, color, or national origin. So the meetings that you're hosting, and especially the coordinated transportation plan meetings. And then third, to ensure meaningful access to transit-related programs and activities by persons with limited English proficiency. So the requirements for Title VI are to prepare and submit a Title VI program or plan. We have a template for this if you don't currently have one, and we can work with you to fill that out. And then also to notify beneficiaries of protection under Title VI. So to have notifications posted in your office or posted on your website or on the brochures that you're giving out into the community. So just something to keep in mind as you're creating some outreach materials. And then the Americans with Disabilities Act is to ensure individuals with disabilities are not excluded from, denied benefits of, or subject to discrimination in any programs or activities receiving federal financial assistance. So you can meet this requirement by creating and adopting an ADA plan and policy. We do have a template, but we'll have to work with you through that if you're not with the transit agency. It's going to look a little bit different, and we can definitely help you out with that. Ensuring all meetings are held in accessible locations and accessible options are offered, such as virtual options. So make sure when you're hosting your meeting at a local organization, whether it be a library or a community center, it's an accessible location and that anybody has the opportunity to attend should they want to. And then ensuring multiple ways to submit coordinated planning surveys or recommendations. So just making sure that everyone has an opportunity to do that in as many ways as possible, whether that be on paper, online, if they need a translator or something like that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim Maseko, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about procurement policy and what FTA procurement is going to look like when you start procuring different projects that you may or may not be doing.
All right, thanks, Jesse. Mobility management programs will need to have a procurement policy in place, and so make sure that you have one or you get one in place if you don't currently have one. 5311s, if you're in one of those transit systems, most likely you do have a very good procurement policy in place. 5310s are a little more sporadic, so it depends on what yours looks like. But please remember that a procurement policy has to follow federal rules that are usually quite different than your local rules. So keep that in mind. But as Jesse mentioned, we have a procurement template available on the website.
Did we lose you, Tim?
Yeah, I keep getting muted for some reason, but
sorry.
Yeah, your local restrictions. So make sure you're comparing that to your federal limits and your local, because your local may be more restrictive than the federal or state limits. So there are three areas to think about. One is micro, which is federal states, anything $10,000 or less is what we follow here in Ohio. Small procurements are $10,000 but up to $50,000, and that is a state of Ohio limit of $50,000. Federal is much larger. You cannot follow that larger amount due to Ohio revised code. So between $10,000, less than $50,000 would be considered a small procurement, and a large procurement would be $50,000 or more, which most likely mobility managers don't have to worry about. So we have created a series of forms that will kind of go along with these procurement requirements. The forms are meant to just basically make it easier for you and make it easier for us as we review those for you. So small and large procurements do require document submission to ODOT for review prior to that reimbursement request. So if you actually want to get reimbursed, you have to have the document in place or you may not get reimbursed. Micro procurements do not require submission, but those are reviewed during the TAR process. So it's important that you follow the micro procurement as well. So this is a tentative list of the procurement forms, and this is something brand new that we just put together this year. And so you'll have access to these forms as you need them. And there in the far right column, it says micro, do I need this? Small, do I need this? Large, do I need this? And each one of these forms is part of the checklist, which we're going to talk about here on the next slide, I believe. Yep. So procurement thresholds, again, we went over that already, but this is just an idea of what those checklists look like. So you'll get the ODOT checklist for the micro, and we'll take the micro one, for example, which is most of you are going to be spending these micro amounts. So number one, you need to use the form that is fair and reasonable price documentation. So you want to basically just make sure that what you're paying for that particular item is fair and reasonable, and the federal government does require that. Now, if you're spending construction money, there's a Davis-Bacon Act, which most of the time you will not be. You do want a copy of your vendor invoice and a delivery receipt if it's a capital item, and then normally a copy of the PO. So those things would go together and be kept in a folder somewhere in your place of business. And those is what we're going to pull out during a technical assistance review. And we're going to just randomly select some of those to make sure you're keeping records of your procurements. Now, understand, it doesn't have to be real complicated, but this is the premise behind it. Some people have told me they use a fair and reasonable price stamp, where they'll stamp the invoice and then handwrite on how they determine it's fair and reasonable. Some people have stickers. So that form that I mentioned is just an example of how you have to do something to show the FTA that you are fairly determining you're not overpaying for something. Small procurements there. It's hard to read this, but there's quite a few different steps in there that you have to take, and you're going to want to work with me directly within my office to make sure that you're following that correctly, and we do get you reimbursed, because as you spend these larger amounts, there's a lot more requirements, a lot more things you have to do about responsible vendors and all these different categories. So make sure you reach out to me if you want to make a purchase over $10,000. And again, I won't go into that too much today because I don't think any of you are going to hit that threshold. But again, if you think you are for some reason, please reach out to my office. So once again, this kind of like sums it up, but micro procurements do not require ODOT submission prior to that purchase, but they're going to be reviewed when the TAR occurs. Small procurements do require some submission of supporting documents before we're going to reimburse you. And large procurements actually is a whole three-phase process we won't get into again today. But the point I'd like to make on this slide is federal and state funding will follow the same process. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you're getting state dollars or federal dollars. The only major difference is if you need to attach any federal clauses or not. And so pretty much the process is going to be the same no matter where that funding source comes from going forward. And I think that's it for me, Jesse. So unless anyone has questions. One thing I would add though, Jesse, is you mentioned earlier that if you are with a transit system, your important documents that we mentioned earlier are probably covered. That's very true. However, again, if you're with the 5310 system, you may or may not have had a TAR review, which means you may or may not have compliant policy. So I'd strongly encourage you to go back to your system and just ask about those policies or take a look around and see what you have in place, because maybe you can help your system get it compliant if they happen to be out of compliance and we just haven't been out there to review your system yet. Things have changed dramatically the last couple of years since I came to ODOT, and we're trying to catch everybody up. So it's better if you find it first and just let me know and we can work through it. It's just easier for all of us. So that's one thing I'd add.
Thanks, Tim. So with that, we'll just do a general Q&A for any lingering questions folks might have about anything for the state fiscal year 2025 Ohio Mobility Management Program.
Okay, let's see here. Thank you, Jesse and Tim. We do have a question. They're asking, do mobility managers need to have and follow a reasonable accommodation policy?
Yeah, that's a great question. Tim, I saw that you unmuted, so I'm going to let you take it.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, so reasonable accommodation or modification policies are meant that you are modifying whatever you're offering to accommodate someone with a disability. So yes, you should have something. It doesn't mean it's going to look like maybe the local transportation system does, but if I were to call you up as a member of the public and say, hey, you're having a meeting at this location and I need you to help me do ABC. Can you do that? Is it a reasonable request that I'm making of you without altering like the movement, things like that. So you should have some policy in place that does address that.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Let's see here. I'm looking. Let's see here. Okay, we have a nice long question. Hold on one sec. Okay. We have someone who said that they have a very large budget in Toledo and they're looking to purchase a significant amount of marketing materials. that could cover, let's see here, over that, I'm not sure what they're saying. Amount of marketing materials over that could enter into a large procurement range, mainly because they haven't had any items for a while due to position being vacant. So I guess they're hoping to get some more clarity. Oh, they want to ask, this person is wanting to ask you like verbally about this. Is this something that you would like to do, or do you want to have him contact you, or how would you like to go about that?
Yeah, I would say that if you have a large procurement like that, number one, we got to make sure the program coordinator has approved that large procurement, that there's that kind of money allotted for it. And then you'd want to reach out to me directly and we can have this conversation one-on-one, because it's a process. Once you get into those large procurements, there's all kinds of things with an RFP possibly, and just all different types of factors. So to have to know more about the specific situation to answer that well.
Okay, that sounds great. Let's see here. I'm not seeing any more right now. I'll just ask everyone, if you have any more questions, go ahead and feel free to put them in the question box.
There is one thing I probably should add while we got a moment.
Oh,
Because we
sure.
didn't put a slide in for the mobility management. I think we might have for the other presentations. I do want to mention the fact that technical assistance reviews have not really been done in depth with the mobility managers up to this point in time. But going forward, especially as we get into 2025, you can anticipate that you will probably be looked at some point in time. So keeping records, showing that you're doing allowable activities. We're going to look probably at your finances and all these different compliance pieces. So really think about how your program's designed and make sure you keep good documentation. Even if you reach out to someone in the ODOT Office of Transit and we say, sure, go ahead and do that, I highly recommend you have that in writing in an email somewhere to justify it, because sometimes someone leaves a department and you say, well, so-and-so told me I could do that, but there's no written proof. And so you're going to have that proof if you get pulled for a technical assistance review, simply because that's what we need. We have to have documentation that whatever you're doing has been approved by someone or is permissible according to the different rules and regulations. But anticipate that going forward that some of you are going to start getting pulled and looked at a little bit closer, just like the transit systems do, starting probably not until 2025 for most of you, or after.
Great, thank you for that clarification, Tim. I had another question come in. I couldn't understand exactly what the person was asking, so I asked them for a little bit of clarification. So we will see if they come back with some clarification here in a moment, quickly. And I guess give everybody a chance to kind of get in any questions. We're just about out of time. Okay, it looks like we do not have any more questions. So I will, let's see here. That's all we have today. So on behalf of LTAP and ODOT, I'd like to thank Jesse and Tim for their valuable information and knowledge sharing with us. As mentioned earlier, the recording of this webinar and PDF link will be shared with all registered attendees. Thank you for attending, and we hope you found this webinar informative and engaging. Have a wonderful rest of your day.